Welcome to Stories Podcast. I'm your host, Amanda Weldin. In honor of Black History Month, we present a story called The Handkerchief from the African Folktales with Miss JoJo podcast. Join Miss JoJo as her magic jeep travels to a faraway land where you will meet a wise girl named Zakia. After becoming the king's advisor, Zakia must find a way to save him when a sticky situation arises. To find out what happens next, be sure to tune in. To listen to more African tales, search African Folktales with Miss JoJo on Apple Podcasts. You won't want to miss out. Thanks. Enjoy the episode.
ABF Creative.
Little ones, my name is Miss JoJo, and you're listening to African Folktales. Hop inside my magical jeep with me as we explore African lands where animals talk and people fly. Are you ready? Get in! Make sure your seatbelt is on. The only thing we want to let loose is your imagination. Let's set the destination for our next story. Here we go! Hang on! Today, our magic jeep travels to a faraway land where we'll meet a clever girl named Zakia. Make sure to listen closely for the bell. The bell will ring when I say the magic word of the story. Listen all the way to the end to discover if you guessed it correctly and have fun. Not too long ago, there was a beautiful girl named Zakia. She lived in a small village with her father and helped him with his work. Zakia's father noticed how wise she was, and so he would often come to his daughter for advice whenever he had a problem. While Zakia's beauty caught everyone's attention, it was her cleverness that set her apart from the rest. Neighbors would overhear the conversations Zakia had with her father, and news of her wisdom quickly spread far and wide until it reached the king, who just so happened to be in search of a new advisor. The king traveled to the village and found Zakia's father. He asked if Zakia would be interested in the job. Yes, of course, Your Majesty, exclaimed Zakia's father. He was overjoyed and expected Zakia to be as well. My daughter accepts the job. Thank you. Once the king left, Zakia's father rushed home to tell her the news. But instead of sharing her father's enthusiasm, Zakia quickly grew upset. Why would you agree to it without asking me first? She replied. No, I will not work for someone I do not know, father, even if it is the king. Please, my daughter. Working for the king is a very important job, said her father. It will earn us enough money to eat well, and he is a kind and clever man. Zakia was quiet as she mulled over her father's words. While his logic made sense, there was just one matter that bothered her. I will not work for him just because he's royalty, said Zakia firmly. I'll accept that job only if the king is willing to learn a trade. If I see that he is serious about listening to others, then I will be his advisor. And so the next morning, Zakia's father made his way to the palace and addressed the king. He explained Zakia's wish in great detail, which made the king smile. Your daughter is not only beautiful, but very clever too. I'll be glad to do as she asks, said the king. From that day on, the king began to learn how to weave. He spent countless hours practicing on a beautiful loom and even learned how to dye his own yarn. After many weeks of lessons, the king could finally weave a beautiful handkerchief, which he sent to Zakia as a present. Zakia was very impressed by the king's handiwork. She held it up to the light and closely inspected it. She could tell that the king took the task seriously. "Now I will work for him," she told her father. "He has proven to be an open-minded king." In that same month, Zakia and her father moved in with the king. They were treated with much kindness and respect, and Zakia quickly proved to be a wonderful advisor. There was one day when the king was particularly troubled. He came to Zakia and said, "I would like to know my people better, but how can I think like them?" Zakia thought for a minute and then replied, "My king, if you wish to know others well, you must live like them. You must spend a day in the city streets and familiarize yourself with the people and their lives. Only then will you understand them." Do you think the king ignored Zakia's advice? If you said no, you are right. Just like before, the king was willing to listen to Zakia because he trusted her wisdom. The king took his advisor's words to heart. The very next day, he took off all his expensive jewelry and dressed in simple clothes. When no one was looking, he snuck out of his palace and walked the long distance to the city on foot. By the time he arrived, the sun had already started to set, and the king found himself hungry and worn out. "I know what I'll do," the king thought. "I'll find a restaurant where the local people eat. That way, I can get my energy back and learn about them at the same time." The unsuspecting king then stumbled upon a small restaurant on a dark little street. As soon as he walked through the door, the floor underneath him gave way, and the king fell. He shouted for help, but no one came to his rescue. "What just happened? Where am I?" exclaimed the king. Suddenly he heard a laugh and looked up. Above him was a mean-looking old man who made terrible faces at him.
"You are stuck here forever. No one will know where you are,"
said the old man in a croaky voice.
"I'll use a magic spell to turn myself into you. Then I'll be young again."
With that, the old man hobbled away, leaving the king alone. Instead of panicking, the king sat down and carefully considered all of his options. He thought long and hard until Zakia came to mind. What would my advisor do? He thought. And just like that, an idea popped into his head. When the evil old man returned a few hours later, the king called out, "Hey, I want to tell you something, old man. Listen closely. You may receive a large sum of money for it." This caught the old man's attention.
I do like money. Go on."
"I am a weaver," said the king. He knew not to reveal his true identity. "The king's advisor likes my work. I'll weave a beautiful handkerchief and you can take it to her. You'll get money for it. I am sure of it." The old man, who was oblivious to the king's plan, agreed to this and brought down a loom and some thread. The king quickly got to work and made an eye-catching handkerchief for Zakia. He made sure to add unique patterns that she'd recognize. Once he finished, the king gave his handkerchief to the old man, who then made his way to the palace. At first, he had a hard time getting in, but after explaining that he was looking for the king's advisor, the servants finally let him in to see her.
I have a very beautiful handkerchief.
The old man said to Zakia.
Look at it, please. A good weaver made it. Will you buy it?
At once, clever Zakia understood that the king was in trouble. Yes, it is indeed very beautiful, she answered. I like it and I'll buy it. After paying the old man, Zakia secretly ordered the guards to follow him into the city. They were eventually led to the restaurant where the king was being held. Soon he was freed and brought back home to the palace where Zakia was waiting for him. My dear Zakia, exclaimed the king upon seeing her. You saved my life. You are truly the cleverest person in the world. Zakia was pleased to hear these words. But more importantly, she was relieved that the king had taken all of her advice and lessons to heart. From that day on, the king went on to rule with great grace and wisdom, for he always had the clever Zakia by his side. The moral of the story is that we can always learn something from those around us. Staying open-minded not only helps us grow, but also lets us form relationships with the people in our lives too. We can always turn to the advice of the friends and family we trust most. Did you hear the bell? Did you discover the magic word of the story? If you said weave, you're right. Weave is spelled W-E-A-V-E. Weaving is the process of crossing thread or yarn on a loom to make cloth. Lots of things can be made by weaving, such as baskets, clothes, and even rugs. Would you ever give it a try? Thanks for taking this trip with me today. I can't wait for you to travel to the next story with me. African Folktales is produced by ABF Creative. To learn more about the show, go to abfc.co/folktales. If you loved this show, then tell someone you know. Our magical Jeep journeys are more fun when you can bring your friends along. Thanks for listening. Bye!
Today's story, The Handkerchief, is from African Folktales with Miss JoJo. To listen to more African tales, search African Folktales with Miss JoJo on Apple Podcasts. If you would like to support Stories Podcast, you can leave us a 5-star review on iTunes, get ad-free episodes and early access when you subscribe to our Wondery Plus Kids feed on iTunes or Apple Podcasts, check out all of our merch available at storiespodcast.com/shop, commission a special video on Cameo, follow us on Instagram at Stories Podcast, or simply tell your friends about us. We wanted to let all of you know that we've just launched our official YouTube channel at youtube.com/storiespodcast. If you've ever wanted to read along with us, these videos are just for you. They feature the text of the stories nice and big on the screen, with each word highlighted as I read it, so you can match up the way it looks with the way it sounds. YouTube also lets you change the play speed, so depending on your level, you can slow down the narration to follow along. They're great for new readers, storybook time, English language learners, and even just for listening. And in the future, we plan on adding more read-alongs, some live storytime readings, Q&As, and more. Check it out at youtube.com/storiespodcast. Thanks for listening. Thanks for listening.